Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which remains wrapped in a pandemic, even as the vaccine is starting to be distributed at fairly high rate in the United States. And the world, though, is still seeing huge gaps in coverage of even the prospect of having the vaccine anytime soon. So the pandemic is not going away. Climate change is not going away either. And today we're going to discuss mostly weather and climate, extremes particularly, with David Schachter from WFAA TV down in Dallas area of Texas, who just won one of the top awards in sort of visual journalism, DuPont Columbia Award for a remarkable piece of journalism that he did, I guess, starting in 2019 as part of this Verify series that WFAA does, that he does, where he basically does the kind of engagement journalism I think is much more of the future than the kind of journalism I grew up doing, which is sort of me telling you the state of the world. It's kind of asking your community, your viewership, what's on their mind, and then diving in with them, as opposed to just going back and reporting a story and saying it back to the person. So, David, first of all, I'm going to unmute you. You're, as anyone can see, you're in an unusual situation, and we'll describe that situation in a second. You're in your car in Dallas. Hold on, I just have to unmute you. Whoops, in a second. There we are. So,
yes.
So how are you?
I'm cold. It's really cold in Dallas today. It's lived here for 15 years. This is the coldest day I've seen here. I think they said 8. I've seen forecasts of going down to -1. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but we're in the grips of a long, cold. It looks like here. My window's still a little frozen, but I'll give you a little shot if you can see it. But this is just like my neighbor's house across the street, but it looks like Minnesota here.
Yeah, it looks like the Hudson Valley right out here. But yeah, this is pretty anomalous.
You would not expect that in Texas,
You know, it's kind of notable. Just early last year, when I was starting to do these webcasts, some students at CUNY Law School wanted to do a conversation with me about the future of climate journalism. I had to do it for my car because we had a storm, and the power was out. So, welcome to our adaptive world.
Got to do it.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to talk about is your adaptive quality of your journalism. I assume you got into journalism doing stuff like I did, sort of expository, telling the audience the state of the world. And this Verify project seems very different. Can you just describe your trajectory in journalism?
Yeah. Well, what we do now is, as you described, is we take a viewer along with us on the journalistic experience, and so they can see whatever I see, and they can ask their own questions, and they can come to their own conclusions. That's where I am now. I feel like everything else I've done in terms of enterprise or investigations or things of depth, just like everybody else, you go out and you collect all the nuggets, and then you, at the very top of the story, you say, "Here's what I found, and now let's talk about what I found." And this is the exact opposite. These stories start with a question: Is climate change happening? And then you spend the next hour trying to get the answer. And I think that's not only is that a good way to learn, it also can be fun. You can show the journalistic process. You can do everything it takes to you can show and have somebody there, kind of auditing and witnessing the whole thing from end to end. Started in Dubuque, Iowa in 1993 at a TV station that's not there anymore, and just worked my way up through all the little towns, and finally made it to Dallas about 15 years ago. And I'm fortunate to work in a company that really has put an emphasis on innovating. Let's try some new things. What other ways can we tell stories to people? And I've been really involved in that endeavor with the company.
And what would you say the advantages are that come out of doing it that way?
Well, I think the objective and probably the advantage is that I not all of our audience, but I think parts of our audience can put a little more trust into what we're doing. I don't think we're I mean, I think we function with a high level of standards, but I think a lot of my colleagues function with a high level of standard. So the openness, the involving the audience along the way, showing them what we're working on, and again having this outsider who, if we didn't tell their story, encapsulate their story, because of course that's what we do. If we don't encapsulate their, in this case, like 6-day experience into 1 hour or 20 minutes or whatever, then there's somebody out there who says, well, those guys are jokers. Those guys twisted my story. And we've taken probably 20 people out to do these kinds of stories. And we don't have those kinds of relationships with those people. I think they are the ones who trust us even more than anybody. We wear these people out, They are so tired after spending a day or 2 or 3 with us. It's 16 hours. We pack it all in. Their time is limited. Our time is limited. I mean, I've seen a lot of guests sleeping in the passenger side car, and we just laugh and look at them like, we wore another one out.
well, you're also saying welcome to the glorious world of journalism.
Yeah, it's a grind. People
have this inflated sense of what that is like. I'm just showing a little bit here from this episode that you did.
Alaska,
so let's just watch for a second.
Ice,
sure.
And the fastest warming state in the country. That's Justin from Dallas. He's 38, a roofing contractor, and a staunch conservative. He rejects the mainstream science of climate change.
I've thought all along that it's a natural occurrence. I just don't believe that it's something that we're causing or creating.
I brought Justin.
So how now? Just tell us the connection. How I know you use Facebook, for example, to sort of put out calls for reader, ideas. Is that where he came from?
So we I think there's 2 kind of buckets of stories. One would be someone has a question, and let's see if we can help them get it answered. And then other things, we are interested in things that are in the zeitgeist of our society, and how can we get in there? So yeah, we did I make a nice trailer video and say, who would like to come with me on this trip? This is what we're going to try to do. We're looking for somebody who is, open-minded, but is, doesn't accept the science here, but would be willing to ask the questions and see the things firsthand. And we kind of go through a bit of a process of talking to 120 people. We do a checklist, and can you fill this out? And then we might call back 20 of them, and then we might have 4 that we want to talk to some more. So, I mean, I guess you could call it casting, but I don't think that's really, that would have a negative term.
Yeah.
But you want to take the right person. You don't want someone who's just wants to be on TV, or somebody who's so close-minded that they can't ask questions of people. You also don't want someone who's going to be a pushover. You want someone who's going to go out there and throw some punches and say, I don't believe this, and prove it to me. So it's that part takes a lot of time, and you really don't see much of that, but it does. It adds a lot to the process. It also, of course, I think adds to the product.
Yeah, let's watch a little bit more.
Dioxide and other greenhouse gases, and that is causing the temperature on Earth to rise. At the midway point of this trip, Justin says the jury is still out.
My main takeaways from this first part of the trip were everybody's against me. No, I'm joking. They weren't really against me, but they had different opinions than me.
This is a route that people have been taking for thousands of years.
We're meeting up with Brian Brettschneider. He's a climatologist with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Brian wants us to see a glacier. That means we're going on a hike.
I didn't sign up for this, man.
So I've got to ask too, budget-wise, that's a stretch for a Dallas enterprise that's mostly online video to send someone to Alaska to charter helicopters and stuff. So how does that work?
Well, the story is definitely, this is a 10-minute version from Alaska.
Yeah.
There's a 10-minute version from Texas. And those were marquee pieces in our 10 o'clock newscast. So we'll run 10, 12-minute story in our 30-minute newscast at 10 o'clock, which is amazing, I got to say.
Wow.
But we have been doing this franchise for long enough. And for whatever reason, my boss had some budget, and I came in and I pitched it to her. and she said, "How soon can you go?" That she was willing to take a swing because I think we'd brought the goods beforehand, and she trusted us to do it. And as much as we did spend, we spent more than we would ever spend on something, but it also wasn't that much money in the scope of things. Had this produced at a network, the budget would have been 15 times more than I think what we spent. We're so scrappy and frugal, and we wanted to save money for that helicopter, and so that was like that's where you start with your budget. Like, what is it going to take to get the helicopter out there? And that made a big impression on him, that helicopter, and being on the glacier.
Had you been to Alaska before yourself?
I was there once as a kid with my family, like on a family vacation.
But not reporting.
No, and it is, what an amazing place. I can't wait to go back. It's it kind of steals a little part of you just to be there and see it. Yeah,
the most significant trip I made there reporting wise was to the North Slope of Alaska in December of 2003. And December is an adventure. It's 40 degrees below zero and 40 knot winds, but it was an amazing story. It's an amazing place.
How long were you there for?
God, I can't remember. A few days on the ground.
Yeah.
I want to show, I think that more recently you've done an episode that's pretty much in the news right now, which is about Texas's wind. I'm not going to play the audio, but just sort of maybe you can talk through a little bit about this episode and what you're revealing about Texas and renewable energy.
This is similar. We can't do every story with a guest or we would just kill ourselves. So we use the same format. It's, it doesn't have the buddy movie aspect where you're kind of making friends with somebody along the way, but everything's broken into 3 scenes, and we go out and we explore a question. And so this question is, is Texas really is conservative Texas really the leader in wind in the country? And
right.
What you learn here is that Texas did this unbelievable thing, like I think more than 15 years ago. It was called the CREZ legislation, and they said, well, we I think the energy power player type people were interested in getting into wind, and the state wanted to make that possible. And so, but all the winds in West Texas and the people are in Dallas and Houston, hundreds of miles away. So the state said, okay, we'll make sure to build the infrastructure to nowhere. There's nothing out there. The wind's not, they haven't built anything in order to ensure that there's a market for the wind. And Texas does lead the country in wind production, which is, amazing. And here you can see all the local economies have taken in all kinds of additional money. I presented this story as a business story or a political story and a job story. This guy's so happy to have his job. He doesn't really care about wind. He's just happy to have a really good job. And so we showed how that thinking in Texas, the Texas miracle, for good or for bad, was like, let's make some money. Let's do this thing right. And that's how Texas became the leader.
Yeah, and I think that gets missed by a lot of people who automatically look at the map of the United States and think of sort of red, blue states as anti-renewable, pro-renewable, and they miss some of these dynamics.
Yeah, this is the General Motors plant in Arlington, where they are huge consumers of the wind again. So they sign a contract and say, we're going to take this factory all wind. And so we need how many megawatts that is. And when they sign that contract, that causes all those megawatts to be built and then delivered, into the grid. They don't necessarily get the megawatts that they're paying for, but it goes into the grid.
Right.
And they're telling the story here. And now here we are later saying they're going to be all electric before everybody else. So this is marketing for them too.
Interesting. Let's go back to the situation you're in right now. Are you reporting on what's going on?
I happen to have the day off today.
Right.
So I'm lucky to not be out covering in the snow here, but we've had rolling blackouts. They said they were going to be 15 to 45 minutes, that the grid was under stress, partially because of wind, which we can talk about. And this morning, our power went out from about 5 till 9, so like 4 hours. and now they're saying it's going to be more than 15 minutes when it happens. It's going to be 4 or 5 hours. We can't even tell you. There's going to be a political, backlash from
Sure.
what appears to be a planning failure. I don't know what it actually is until you look at it more deeply.
So remind people, just as a Texas homeowner, what conditions you're kind of set up for there and what you're not set up for. Why people are, it's electric heat. And I assume, do you have electric heat or?
We have gas heat
heat
in my house, but it's all powered, with electricity and the fans and stuff,
right.
so it won't work without it. I live in a home that's almost 100 years old, single pane windows,
Right.
Almost no insulation in the walls. And you feel like you right today, you walk around downstairs in my house and it feels like somebody left the door open somewhere. That's an old house. I think the new houses are probably better, but there's a lot of big houses with high ceilings and require a lot of electricity to cool and to heat, but you don't expect this to happen. It doesn't happen very often, and when it does, it's a day or two. So we're really it's colder than normal. The duration's longer than normal.
Right. And I guess I know on social media for sure this is playing out. I saw the WhatsApp with that, folks, going at the wind power. All these turbines are freezing, and here we are. We should have 10 more coal-fired power plants here in Texas. You can just see how this plays out.
Yeah. What's your take on, so I guess they're saying half the wind power is unavailable. Nuclear, I guess, is unavailable today, and some natural gas plants. But to have half the turbines freeze over for even a limited amount of time, to me, that seems like if that happens every 10 years, that's probably acceptable. Plus, it doesn't seem to be the only reason this is happening.
Well, yeah, to me, this reminds me of when I covered Hurricane Sandy in New York City, and there was that huge blackout below sort of lower Manhattan and terrible things in some of the outer boroughs. What was interesting at the time was there were areas in New York City where the power stayed on, and they had what's called an island capacity. This is Co-op City in the Bronx, NYU's hospital. And basically they have gas generation for electricity locally as a backup. And that idea of having a system that has some redundancy is what comes to mind. This gets to in hot areas like California, you have to maintain peak power capacity through gas plants, even if you're going to more renewables. And that becomes a debate. How fast can you do that? Can't we have batteries instead? And, California is sort of a test bed for that. So maybe Texas will be a test bed in the opposite direction.
Well, I've never seen it here in the summer. This doesn't happen. They don't say dial back. We don't have enough. They're ready in the summertime. And so this is sort of this edge case that happens when it's excessively cold. And this is also the time of year when they are doing maintenance on energy facilities. And so some of them are down and some of them aren't ready to go. So it's interesting. I'll be interested to see if wind takes it on the chin here, but it just feels like that would be too narrow of a focus on what's happening.
I think it will be in the end. I think Iowa, Texas, there are other states where it's just expanding because of economics, and just then you build in enough plasticity and readiness,
batteries,
for these tough situations like this, sort of extreme events.
The power grid here in Texas is so fascinating to me, and they really do they operate it. Sometimes the margin gets thin, but Texas is the only, as you know, is the only state in the country that has its own power grid. We're not connected to anything else, and so they were able to deregulate the entire way energy is delivered and distributed and purchased, and the costs of electricity have plummeted in the 15 years since I lived here, and the renewable market is great, and I think solar is now about to really take off as well.
Yeah, I saw it's actually become a little bar in the graphs now. There's enough
Yeah.
solar that you can actually see a solar sliver. What's the reaction when you do a story like the one you did on wind power?
So it's funny that this guy here is a state lawmaker who still happens to be like the only one in office who was behind this when it happened, and he won't even, he doesn't talk about climate change at all. He kind of snickered at me when I said it, and he doesn't need to, I guess, as long as he supports wind. You get a lot of Facebook is a terrible cesspool of mean people. Let's just be honest. So I've learned to not listen too much to the commentary on Facebook. It's like I just get attacked. But one of the interesting things that happened here is everyone's like, "What about the birds? It kills all kinds of birds." So I said, "Okay, well, let's go." Then I did a follow-up story, and we fact-checked: does wind kill a lot of birds?
Interesting.
And the fact of the matter is, it does kill a lot of birds, but in context to cats, it's nothing. And in context to tall buildings, it's minuscule.
Yeah, I did a story about the cats. Boy, that's a heated issue too. People were screaming at me on both sides.
Yeah, right. How dare you?
Don't let you can't let your cats outdoors anymore. You can't say that as a journalist and not get attacked. So I'd love to know whether you've kind of revisited the situation with Justin. Let's go back to that story, because that's the one that we won this fantastic award and really broke new ground, I think.
I appreciate that.
Are you in touch with him?
Do you feel like it broke? We came back. Well, I think we shot. It aired about a little over a year ago, and we came back. We had a couple of beers with him. We've called him from time to time. I called him to say, "Hey, come watch the DuPonts." He's kind of like doing his own thing. What's interesting is that, and I think he's held on to his point of view, but I think the thing to note is that he doesn't really care that much. It's not like climate change isn't like his thing,
right?
Like and probably for a lot of people, it's just like, I got to go to work, I got to do this, I got to do that.
Sure.
And so he held this opinion. It wasn't core to his life, but he held an opinion that a lot of people held, and realized at the end that he was wrong about that. And he didn't come back, and I think he's changed a little bit of his life. I think he's probably doing a little bit more recycling. He said something like that, and he said he would research whether he could sell solar tiles or not. But also, I kind of
he's a roofer. With him. That's interesting, actually.
Yeah, he's a roofer, right? If anybody would notice that it was getting the conditions were getting more extreme, you think a roofer would notice that, but he didn't. But as a hunter, he was concerned, and a bird hunter. And we wanted to go. We were talking to him about going on a bird hunt with him and his buddies, so we could all sit around a campfire at night and kind of have that conversation with him and his friends. But we haven't really been able to do hardly any of this stuff because we can't have another person in the car with us. We have to be 6 feet away. We have to wear a mask. And so much of this is predicated on, being close to each other and having moments and stuff. And it's just killed all of that ability to, bring out people's personalities so that you can feel the story more.
Oh yeah. And that's something we should talk about, because this Monday series that I do, which I call Thriving Online, one of the questions I'm examining is, can you have online experience or distance experience that can build that sense of trust, that came in the car or, hiking in Maine, in Alaska.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure yet. I've seen some instances where it seems feasible, but when you add in sort of screen burnout, it just creates another impediment to the comfort level you would want. So I don't know. I think that's one of the problems with social media generally. You see it as an abstraction.
Yeah. Right. But I could potentially set it up so that I have a guest with me in the Zoom room and we're interviewing other people, but that's just not the point. We're experiential. We are trying to provide an adventure, because I do think like truth can be an adventure and should be an adventure. And the spirit of what we do is, let's just go get our machetes out and, cut down some vines and go see what's back there. And without that, I don't think we're really all, much different from other ways of telling stories. And so impatiently waiting for things to get a little bit better. And then I've really shifted a lot of my focus just to pure investigation and a variety of topics, because that's it's still kind of available to me.
Right. That sequence you did on wind power and then the bird question is really interesting to me, because you're being iterative, sort of taking it along for a ride. And here you did the Texas part and then the Alaska part. It might be fun to try to do a Act 3. Like,
Let's
take him to Elon Musk's solar roof company.
Yes.
Something like, I don't know, that might be interesting. It would probably be intriguing enough to him that he'd want to go along.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, that would be, I do think, I guess what we have not, and you're on the right thing, because we purposefully skipped modeling of the future because you can't verify the future, and that is our brand. I mean, you can't prove the future, and we also really stayed away from solutions with him as well, because we just wanted to focus on the problem and establish the baseline for him, but also for me and for us as an organization, to get the confidence to report on climate, because there's such a fear even in news organizations, particularly local ones. Like, it's complicated and there's a lot of controversy, and so it's just both sides of this thing and move on. So I think we're one of the few that has been able to get past that, because we went out and kind of earned it, did the work to prove it, which was one of the reasons. So I think moving on to solutions, to your point, would be good.
This is where you might have seen when I was tweeting the other day, the work of John Sutter comes up when I see your stuff, because he was a CNN videographer on the opinion side at CNN. And in 2015, he did that 2 Degrees series leading up to the Paris talks. And I was just so charmed by the visit he made to Woodward County, Oklahoma, which was the most skeptical county in America, according to Yale surveys on climate change. And he found people there who, when the conversation turned to energy, they were completely aligned with anyone who would care about climate change, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
Meaning, there's the guy, I could show it here if we have time, a oil company executive who says, half of our roof is covered in solar panels and we want to get off the grid entirely.
Right.
But when you dug in, you realize the reason he wants to get off the grid is the same reason he would never vote for Hillary Clinton at that time. It's because he doesn't like someone telling him what to do, big government or big utilities. And if he can make his own, electricity out of sunlight, God damn it, he'll kind of do it. And that gets to that point you said earlier, that there was that politician you mentioned who doesn't talk about climate change, but is all into wind.
Yeah.
And one of my big learnings is, I think, around that. Like, that's why I don't tend to focus on writing more of these, big cover stories on global warming.
Right.
And I focus more these days on conversation and dialogue. It just, more big stories like that tend to divide people sometimes more than they actually change things.
Yeah. I think well, as it relates to Justin, for example, I think what we did there, and I would recommend doing with anybody, is we didn't belittle him in any way.
Sure.
We didn't say, you don't know, and you don't know this, and you don't know that. I mean, it's a delicate balance to decide what information you're going to present to him, how it's going to be presented. If you went back and looked at the information, was it presented in a fair way, or are you trying to just hammer this guy to make him change his mind? I don't want that. But, we had a good time together. Like, I like him. And I want to be we set that tone because we're going to spend some time together. What are you into? You talked about hunting a lot, and we talked about the things that he cared about a lot. And, I think Catherine Hayhoe is so good on that just find out what people like. What's the entry point? Where do you intersect with somebody? And start having that conversation. Nobody likes to know it all, and climate change intersects in so many places that you probably can find a place where you're like, well, that makes sense. Climate change or an adaptation to it makes some sense for you where you are, right? It makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
So,
of course, what you're describing.
I think we try to really.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, I was going to just say that you were. It sounded like you were cutting out for a moment there, but you're back then.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
You're fine. Here's what's a challenge to me, which is when you think of scale, whether it's scale of how we cover journalism in newsrooms, or scale in how people in a community address each other. It's really hard to see how to get that process, that intimacy you're describing, the time it takes to develop that true kind of engagement isn't something that it's kind of bespoke. It's like, it's hard to have I don't know if you have your own menu. Like maybe you've done this enough with this Verify thing. Do you have a 1, 2, 3 process you could convey to someone who wants to try to reach out in a way?
Well, I think to replicate what we're doing it's been proven difficult. And can you hear me still?
Yeah.
You got me?
Yeah, it's a little slow.
It's proven difficult. Andrew Dessler at Texas A&M, who's a great climate scientist, he just tweeted,
now you are freezing.
Am I still there?
A bit. You froze for a second there. So are you freezing actually? Are you freezing?
How about now?
It's a little better.
Actually, I'm quite warm. I might roll the window down here.
So you were talking about Dessler, yeah.
At Texas A&M?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He tweeted after the DuPont, if David could just take every climate skeptic to Alaska, we'd be in a much better place, to your point. But I hope that showing the experience and broadcasting the experience and having people maybe identify with Justin is one way. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, I guess. That's the getting to scale is his journey. If you believe that it was, truthful, could be shared with hundreds of thousands or millions of people.
Right. So I think that's where the mass media that you're in, the visual media too, can do a better job of that than text, print. I just think it's more organically connecting through emotion and shared experience. When you're reading a story, it's hard to get some of that. Maybe this is a TV thing.
It might be. And I was curious, you said before that it's like we added, I don't know how you said it, that we added something to the reporting of climate change, or to that extent, like that this was something new that we hadn't seen before. Why do you, because I always felt like I was just the little brother, kind of, there's so much stuff that had gone on, and here we are in 2020, and you've been doing this, I don't know, for so long. How did that add to the sort of the canon at all, or that maybe that's not the right word, just like the body of work?
I think it's it's relaxing from having to be the authority figure. Journalism, I was at the New York Times for 20 years in different capacities, and there's very much the page one of the frickin' New York Times, the evening news. There is a sense of, we go out, we learn, we tell you the state of the world. And what you did and are doing through Verify is flipping the script. And you're implying you're on a learning journey, which is, of course, what every reporter is ultimately. but we often don't convey that. We convey in a front page article or a special report what we know as opposed to what we're learning. And especially on an issue like climate change, which is so many issues tangled together, it really requires that open approach, which I ended up doing at the New York Times through my blog, .earth. That was my sort of revelation, was, hey, you know, I'm on a learning journey. Follow along, you know, comment. I'm actually paying attention to the comments. I'm trying to make sure they're not idiotic and that they're constructive, but let's have a conversation, you and me, audience, including experts who would comment and regular people. So I think that's the difference. And there are other people doing this. There is a successful print, a successful experiment in Ohio called Your Ohio Voice, where the Akron Beacon Journal, old school newspaper, flipped the script during the opioid epidemic and said they started doing convenings. They actually had, rather than a reporter going to a town hall, you know, or some kind of, oh, we've lost him, he'll come back. But I'll complete the thought. Your Voice Ohio, rather than reporting on events, would invite the community to events as a news entity. I'll show their website. And it's kind of a listening process. It's very different than, again, the average newsroom. I'll show that as David comes back. He's coming back. I see him in the from his car. Hold on. 1 second. Got you back.
Sorry about that. I'm back.
No, of course not. Yeah, you're doing yeoman service here. I was just describing Your Voice Ohio and trying to bring up the website on my very slow connection as well. So, yourvoiceohio.org.
Is that part of that? There's also this curious movement started from WBEZ, and then there's curious techs in here in Dallas that kind of take people's questions and try to answer them at the Dallas Morning News.
Oh, that's interesting.
I do think that there's an, as you're talking about, that this idea that you can stand up here and tell people down there what's going on is totally destroyed by social media and everyone being able to have a little bit or a big microphone. And so if you can't, you know, we continue to talk down at the audience is not where we are, I think, today in communications, period.
No, but again, this is why I think it was the right choice for the DuPont folks to give you the big prize, because it's not just that you did a very good explanatory piece. The elements of that report that were explanatory were great. But to me, it's the framing, it's the entire structure of Verify that is so meritorious. I just think it's really cool. Let's watch a little bit more here. Assuming the signal holds up, I'm going to unmute this.
The journal Climate Dynamics found many glaciers around the world are projected to lose more than 50% of their current ice volume by 2050.
What do the glaciers tell us about climate change? What's the story they tell?
They get tremendous amounts of snow and precipitation, and they kind of are just barely below freezing. And so when you warm things up, even just a little bit, you turn a tremendous amount of that snow into rain.
So it's raining instead of snowing.
In much of the year, it's now raining instead of snowing.
That'd be something to be worried about.
Full disclosure, I think our elevational change is what, 4 feet?
Ah, thank God. That's the best news I've heard all day. This is insanely beautiful in here.
It is, isn't it?
Doug Causey is a biologist with the University of Alaska Anchorage. He studies this area, including the salmon, which spawn here just before they die.
So is this salmon right here?
Yes,
Okay.
and these are coho salmon. So the cycle of life is that you breed, then you die, and you end up as fish in
Also,
the
have to
stream.
pay for college too. That's in there, right?
That's right.
Pay for college.
To show us how warming temperatures here affect living things, Doug wants to take us into the stream to take some measurements. But Justin forgot his boots in the car.
It's gonna be cold. But I was like, hey, when in Alaska, why not roll up your pants and jump in the water?
This is Alaska rigger, my friend.
So we're watching David.
A little bit.
We're watching David Schechter's
Put it in the water
prize-winning
and then you just
coverage
let it
of
sit.
climate change.
Right now, it's 4 degrees warmer than it was last year.
At this time.
He's back.
So that's okay. So we're talking about
That's one data point.
One data point.
So here's David Schechter back again. Was showing some more of the coverage as he took a climate skeptic, Justin, a roofer from Texas, to Alaska on an open exploratory learning journey to answer questions that Justin had about climate change and doubts, and address the doubts he had. David's cutting in and out because he is in his car in frigid Dallas. There's no power in the house. Temperature was 7 degrees Fahrenheit this morning. So let's get back into this a little bit more. And hopefully we'll have some more input from David before we're done.
And the reason that we concluded to is the climate changes.
Primarily, yes. Salmon don't live by themselves in an aquarium. They're part of an ecosystem. And
Hi, David.
They're being affected by climate change. The ecosystem is.
Hey there.
He wants the fish to come back. He wants the birds to be able to eat.
So you were saying that he's a hunter and a fisherman. So that seemed to be one of the elements that attracted Justin to grasp the environmental change. Yeah, that's okay. Can you hear me okay? We can cut this short. This was really great already. So I think we've covered some good ground. If you're having trouble hearing.
Oh, let's see. Can I hear you now?
Yeah, let's see.
Popped up there for me.
Can you hear okay?
I'm going to try to.
Is that concerning?
Oh, yeah, is that working now? Maybe that is working.
Let's see if you can hear. You hear me okay?
Technology.
Yeah, I know. Well, we may cut this short, but it's been a really useful show so far in that one of the key opportunities in addressing someone who holds different views than you might is to do a lot of listening. I think that's a very clear lesson from what David Schechter has done in the Verify approach to journalism. A lot of hanging out so that you have time for your basic humanness to come through with another human being. And then access to expertise, but not in a sort of chidey way, in a way that fits what the person is seeking on his or her own merits, not, again, feeding people information, presuming that it's going to somehow change their views on a policy matter that they're pretty dug in on. So it's been great so far to have David Schechter from WFAA TV and Dallas on this show. It's incredibly cold down there. It's a historic cold wave and storm for Texas. And I think he's popping in one more time. So we'll give it one more shot here as he's coming into the green room from his car in Texas. We were watching the prize-winning hour-long documentary travelogue that David Schechter did with a roofer who's a climate skeptic, taking him to Alaska. Here's David again. So how are we doing? Can you hear me okay? Any no? David, can you hear me? No? I see you.
Do you see me now?
Yes, we do. And it
Oh
looks
my
very
gosh,
cold.
Is this working?
Yeah.
It's cold out here, though.
I'm not going to force you to stay on any longer, David. Can you hear me okay? You're not hearing me at all.
It's really messed up.
No,
It's
this is
really
great.
hard to hear. I really
Okay.
apologize. I'm screwing up your cool show.
No. This is all part of the cool show. If you hear me and you can offer, oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to show a little bit more of the documentary, and then if David can come back, that's great. If not, This has been a fun experiment, as it always is. Remember, almost a year ago, I was in my car talking to students at CUNY's law school about climate journalism. So here we are bracketing that with connecting with David Schechter, award-winning journalist in Texas, on his documentary in which he took a climate skeptic from Texas to Alaska.
No problem.
And here you are one more time. So let's see if you can hear me okay. David, can you hear me? No? No luck? You're not hearing me? David, it's been great to have you here. It's okay. It's been great to have you here. This is Sustain What, the Thriving Online edition that we do on Mondays with David Schechter, showing his documentary.
Alaska and what might happen in Texas one day.
And he's
If
talking.
what's happening here does start happening. In
Here's the
Texas
key
one
part
day,
of the
it's gonna be
documentary.
So for Justin, the impact was not the science, but seeing it, that's how he concluded that the climate is changing. But don't take my word for it. Take his. Alaska.
So this has been a very amusing and I think pretty valuable Thriving Online episode. A little rocky, given what's going on down in Texas. Really appreciative that my colleague in climate journalism, David Schechter, could spend some time with us. And I'm glad that you could as well. So get on with your day. And here, Lena Straub says, it's been great. It's been great. It's been interesting today. So thank you, Lena and Patrick Jones and Heidi for listening in, and share this with others as you, once we're done, you can, this will be archived in 4 different places, and I'll be catching David Schechter again. I do think I would like to take David, or encourage David to think about taking Justin, who's a roofer, to meet with Elon Musk's solar roofing people. It feels like a very natural. David, can you hear me okay? Any luck?
I think I can hear you a little bit now.
Yes? I'll speak louder.
Okay.
Yes? No? Yeah? Can you hear me now?
I drove around the
Yes.
block. I don't know that it helped.
I want to take you to Elon Musk's, I think the next step for you might be to go to Elon Musk's solar roofing factory with Justin, who's a roofer. And maybe I can facilitate having that happen. It just feels like a natural follow on from what you did so far to have Justin meet with Elon Musk, perhaps even if he can spare the time. We'll find out here on Thriving Online. So I'll do my best to make that happen as a kind of a next step. And one way or the other, this has been an excellent session on innovative journalism. David, you've been great. Thank you.
I can't hear you though.
Thank you for being here today. And we'll be back. You'll be back.
Land
I'm sure.
of snow and ice. And the
I'll
fastest
go out with
growing
this.
state in the country.
So everyone take care, okay?
That's Justin from Dallas.
There's Justin one
He's
more time.
38, a roofing contractor, and a
We'll end with the rainbow. Thanks all for listening. Be well and thrive online.